Just a second.
David, what's happening?
Sorry, I'm just trying to connect to YouTube, and some delays are there. Do you hear my voice?
I hear you, Brother David, loud and clear.
I do as well.
Okay, something strange. Okay, I'll start Zoom bit later. I mean the YouTube bit later. So recording has started. I just welcome everyone. Thanks for being with us. Today we have a lecture from Bob Cooper, the curator of museum and the library. You all know. Um, I would like to welcome all of you again. And today's topic is Sir Moray and the Royal Society. The topic has been requested to be discussed by Turkey and South American brothers from different jurisdictions in South America. So to make it short, I'll just give the floor directly to Brother Bob without too many introductions. I will just remind that we have no politics, no religion, and no interjurisdictional issues being discussed in this format during the lecture. And I hope that you all received the emails from me regarding very interesting initiative from Brother Bob. And having said that, Brother Bob, floor is yours. Please unmute yourself. Let me first mute everyone, and you unmute yourself. Yes,
Okay.
please unmute.
You can hear me all right, David?
Yeah, all fine, all fine.
Good, good. Well, as you know, we've had a few technical problems at this end. It seems that there's a problem with my webcam, which is a bit old, whereas the laptop is brand new. So I think it's just the webcam. So I might try and replace that by a new one online. So if we have problems with the audio, and hopefully not the video as well, but if there is a problem, let me know and I'll try and switch to the laptop mic, which seems to work quite well. Well, good evening, everyone. Certainly evening my time. I don't know about your time, but good evening on my time. This is a subject that was not suggested by me, as David has already said, but by brethren in Turkey and in South America. And it caused me to go and dig out a paper that I'd started working on something like 9 years ago, but never finished. So in some ways, you've actually done me a service, because I now pick up incomplete research, and I now realised from what I'd already done that this is actually an enormous subject. Probably not something that we're going to be able to complete tonight, but certainly we can scratch the surface. And in many ways, what's been interesting to me in sort of picking up this subject from so long ago is the connections that I see in that original research with what we've been talking about over these past few weeks, particularly Hermeticism, William Shaw, of course, and James VI of Scotland, James I of Britain. And we'll see these connections. So what I'm going to do, because this is old research, for once I'm not going to rely totally on my memory and just talk. I've got some notes here. So if you hear rustling paper and puzzled looks on my face, just please bear with me because it's me trying to find a little bit of information. The research paper is far longer than I remember it, even although it is incomplete. It's about 14 pages, so it might take me a little bit of thumbing through to find what it is I want. So it perhaps might not be as smooth a delivery as I would like, but as I say, please bear with me on this. So what we're talking about tonight is Sir Robert Moray and the Royal Society. Now, as I say, because the subject is so large, we may have a problem covering both of those aspects. I think by the time I've finished with Sir Robert Moray, there'll be very little time to actually discuss the Royal Society side of things. But we'll go ahead and I'm sure we'll work something out, even if we have to come back to the subject in the future. So like what I've been saying over the last few weeks, we're blessed, as I said repeatedly, we're blessed in Scotland with so many written records that, frankly, it's a bit of an embarrassment to someone like me, because you would think that, you know, the further back in time you go, the less written material there is. And that, to a certain extent, is true, except in this occasion, where we do have a lot of information and it's extremely interesting. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The written information about Sir Robert Moray, and then we'll go on and, as I say, talk about the Royal Society. So we know that Sir Robert Moray was born in either 1608 or 1609. The actual year's not terribly clear, and he died in 1673. Now, we have, as I say, so many different bits of information that sometimes a bit difficult to know where to start. But we're going to start right at the most important and interesting part for us, with a little bit of history about Sir Robert Moray, his background, and why he's of great interest to us as Freemasons. We know that once James VI had gone to London and become King of Britain, he took with him his son, Charles I. When Charles became king on the death of his father, there was a lot of religious turmoil in the country. And because Charles believed that he was now the king of a united kingdom, Scotland and England. Sadly, Wales doesn't get a mention, but a unified country under one monarch. He was of the religious opinion that the whole country under him as king should be worshipping in the same manner, whether you lived in Scotland or England. The problem with that, of course, is Scotland had a long and turbulent history of going its own way in matters of religion. And we had a Protestant Reformation in 1559, which established a kind of unique form of Protestantism, Presbyterianism. And Charles, in his wisdom, decided that he wanted to have an Episcopalian form of Protestantism, which was much more similar to what the religious practices of England were. So he was trying to impose Episcopalianism on the Scottish people. The great problem with that was that Episcopalianism requires the rule of bishops. So local congregations are not self-governing, which in many ways is very similar to the early Scottish lodges, which were also self-governing. There was no higher authority. So you had churches, local Presbyterian Protestant churches, running their own affairs. And I now begin to wonder whether there was some connection with the way religion was organized in Scotland, whether that had any impact on the way the early Scottish Masonic lodges were being run, because the similarity between the two is quite striking. Anyway, for whatever reason, Charles wanted to have this kind of one nation religious model. And so he imposed this or tried to impose this on the Scots. which led directly to a war, of course. The Scots didn't like being told what to do by this guy in England. And so there was a couple of wars. The reaction of the Scots was to sign what they called the National League and Covenant in 1638, which preserved the Protestant faith in Scotland. And because Charles was trying to impose his view of religious practice, he wanted a prayer book, for instance, a unified prayer book to be used. Anyway, to cut a long story short, there was 2 wars. The first Bishops' War in 1638, which was actually bloodless. Then the second Bishops' War in 1639, which did in fact mean that the Scots invaded England. And so you can see that some things never changed. So the Scots invaded England, and all that turmoil, that conflict, led directly into the English Civil War. And although it's the English Civil War, as it's described, between Cavaliers and Roundheads, between the King and Parliament, the Scots were very much involved as well. The result of these 2 bishop wars, which were before the Civil War in England, the result was that the Scots were allowed to occupy northern England, and they had as their military base, their military headquarters, were in Newcastle on Tyne, which is in the far north of England, northeast of England, not that far from the Scottish border. So this is where the Scottish army is encamped. The war is over, so it's relatively peaceful, but it's still an occupation, an army of occupation for that part of England. And it's in this place, Newcastle on Tyne, that one of the most significant events takes place, which is the initiation of Sir Robert Moray into the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel number 1. Now, it wasn't the complete lodge, it wasn't the entire lodge. This lodge was compiled of people, members of the lodge from Edinburgh, who were with the army, the Scottish army, in Newcastle on Tyne, where they were part of the Pioneer Corps. They were the engineers. They helped the Scottish army to move artillery, built bridges where necessary, all the kind of things. I mean, in America, I suppose the similar thing would be the Seabees. In the UK, that would be the Royal Engineers. In those days, it was they were just Scots who had the ability to build things. And so some of the members of the lodge in Edinburgh were with the army, and they decided to convene a lodge meeting in Newcastle on Tyne in May 1641. And at that meeting, they initiated Sir Robert Moray, as I say, but also, and perhaps more significantly in some ways, another non-stonemason by the name of Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton was the general of artillery. He was responsible for the Scottish cannons, the Scottish Army Artillery Corps, if you like. So you have the two very, very important high-ranking military men involved with this lodge. So Robert Moray was the Quartermaster General of the Scottish Army, and Alexander Hamilton, as I say, was the General of Artillery. So these two are initiated on the same day together. So they knew each other from their military activities, and now here they were being made Freemasons in this lodge. And of course, the Scots do tend to like to say that this is the first recorded initiation of a speculative Freemason on English soil. And indeed, that is correct. Sir Robert Moray was one of the intelligentsia. He's obviously a member of the aristocracy, minor aristocracy, admittedly. He's a knight, he's a sir. And Sir Alexander Hamilton is also a member of the aristocracy. So they are clearly not stonemasons, even although they're joining a stonemason's lodge. So they're, by today's description, they are speculative masons. And as I say, this is in 1641. which is a long time before Elias Ashmole is admitted to a lodge, according to his diaries anyway, admitted to a lodge in Warrington in Cheshire. But even then, Sir Robert Moray and Sir Alexander Hamilton, are not the first speculative Masons to join a Scottish lodge. That happened even earlier in 1634. So in some ways, Sir Robert Moray and Alexander Hamilton are simply following in the footsteps of other members of the Scottish aristocracy by becoming interested in what this operative lodge are actually doing. Now, we're never going to know for sure why they joined, but joined they did. And we know this because what happened was when the Scottish Army was disbanded and the Scots went home, these members of this lodge went back to the lodge, the building in Edinburgh, and they explained what they'd done. And the secretary of the lodge recorded those facts in the lodge minute book. So they record, admittedly a little bit later, not too many months later, but the lodge actually recorded these two people being initiated into Freemasonry in what you would not call a proper lodge, because it was only some members of the lodge that had this meeting. However, this practice was quite common, so we've got to be careful not to read too much into it. Where members of the lodge had gone either for work, or in this case it would be work, but work of a military nature, it was quite common for members of the lodge to initiate people who were local to where they were, initiate them into the lodge, and then report back to the lodge, and who would then record it in their minute books. And these are known as out entries, which is out of the lodge area. And as I say, it's fairly common. They crop up quite frequently in these early minutes. So they were doing nothing unusual. What is unusual, of course, is the two individuals that they decide to initiate. Now, normally, there's been some criticism of, well, if these are so-called speculative Masons, they only wanted to join just to see what was going on. And that might well be true, but in the case of Sir Robert Moray and Alexander Hamilton, there was more to it than that, because they appear in the lodge later as well. Again, they record their presence in the lodge by signing the minute book. So we know that this wasn't just a flash in the pan, it wasn't just a one-off, something to do to kill time while they're on military service. They come back to the lodge after being initiated. And of course, the year I think is quite interesting, 1641, because as a past master of Lodge Sir Robert Moray, 1641, you can see what the Scots have done today, modern Freemasons today. They've waited until the number 1641 has come up in the register of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and then they've formed a lodge named after this this very eminent individual. And not only that, but they've got the number of the lodge as the year in which he was initiated. So Lodge Sir Robert Moray, 1641, is in memory of this very important individual. Yet sadly, nothing has been done to commemorate or memorialize Sir Alexander Hamilton, the General of the Artillery, who obviously was also quite important. But unlike Moray, there's not very much written about him. We don't know much about his life. We know a lot more about Sir Robert Moray. So that was the circumstances surrounding Sir Robert Moray's initiation into the Lodge of Edinburgh. We know after that he takes a great deal of interest in things that we would loosely describe as esoteric. As an individual, he was extremely interested in all sorts of different subjects, from alchemy to fishing to coal mines to all sorts of symbolism, all sorts of different things he was interested in. That ultimately would lead, I think, to the formation of the first genuine scientific body, which was the Royal Society of which more later. So although we have this written record in the lodge about Sir Robert Moray and him being initiated in this lodge by elements of the members of that lodge in Newcastle, we also have an amazing amount of material written by him. And that comes from a very simple fact that his good friend, the Earl of Kincardine, whose descendant was a past grandmaster of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, Lord Elgin. The Earl of Kincardine was quite a senior member of the aristocracy. He goes away to Germany, and we think he went to Germany to try and find ways of improving his coal mining enterprise, which he had on land in Fife, without getting too complicated about it. The coal mines he owned were quite substantially under the sea, which made getting the coal out a very grim affair. So we think he was probably in Germany looking for engineering experts to make a more efficient extraction of coal possible. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he gets to Germany, he goes to Bremen, where he's struck down by a fever. And this is a recurring fever. It reappears every 4 days. And he's virtually bedridden. He can't do anything. He ends up being stuck in an inn or a tavern, the Swan Tavern in Bremen, and he's there in a foreign country with nobody around him. Now, at the same time, his good friend Sir Robert Moray is in Maastricht, which is now in the south of Holland, and he was in Maastricht almost certainly to conduct spying operations on behalf of all sorts of different governments. He seems to have been employed by Richelieu of France, Cardinal Richelieu of France. He was also spying for the Scottish government, but also was sending reports back to the English King, Charles I. So he was a very, very industrious and enterprising individual. It's very difficult to explain why he was a spy for all these different enemies, except that he was probably just a very good juggler of of things, and he was able to keep all these balls in the air at the same time. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he's in Maastricht, and I can give you the exact dates when I find the notes, but he's in Maastricht for some time. He actually describes the fact that he's in Maastricht, he's nailed to Maastricht, which implies he's under orders to stay there. He can't leave. He's literally nailed to that town. And what is interesting is that he's clearly interested in things locally, because, and he's obviously known to the locals as being some kind of expert. They approach him for advice on how to build a new town hall. And what he does is he uses his expertise. I don't think he's a qualified architect by any manner of means, but he uses his expertise to design a new town hall for the city of Maastricht. Interestingly enough, he doesn't attach this new building to any of the existing structures. This is a completely new standalone building in the center of a very large city square, and it still stands to this day. You will, if you go there, it's actually a very interesting building, and it reminds me I need to do some research to see, if possible, whether any kind of Masonic influence is brought to bear by Sir Robert Moray on the design and the location. That's perhaps for the future. But because of his skill in designing and building this structure, he's made a member of the Stonemasons Guild of Maastricht. So he's not only a member of an operative lodge in Scotland, here he is joining a Dutch stonemasons guild, and that was an important step, as well as any sort of, he was being rewarded for his contribution to the new town hall, which still exists, by the way. So he's being rewarded by the locals for the design and building of the new town hall, but it's also an important step to becoming a Brabant citizen, which is a citizen of the area. And so he's obviously extremely well thought of by the people of that area at the time. Anyway, that's why he's in Maastricht. Okay. Now, what happens is he learns that his friend, whose name's Alexander Bruce, second Earl of later second Earl of Kincardine, Alexander Bruce is lying in bed in this tavern in Bremen, and he's seriously ill. So, and Moray can't go to his bedside. He's stuck in Maastricht. So what he does is he starts to write letters to Alexander Bruce, and he tries to treat Alexander Bruce's illness in writing. And there's over 100 letters written to Alexander Bruce by Sir Robert Moray, covering all sorts of different subjects. And it's clear that Moray has this belief in the power of words. And this is something we may have touched on over the last few weeks. Words, and this is quite Kabbalistic in nature and Hermetic, that if you can put powerful words together in a certain sequence, their power is magnified. So Moray is trying to use this technique to treat somebody's illness at a distance of some hundreds of miles. Fortunately for us, his letters still exist. They're in Lord Bruce's family library in Fife, an invaluable resource into all sorts of different insights into this individual's mind. So Robert Moray uses his intellect to write these letters to treat Bruce, and he recognizes that he's dealing with someone who's got a physical illness, but also has a mental illness brought on by confinement and isolation. That sounds kind of similar, doesn't it, to today? And in some ways, we are replicating Sir Robert Moray's technique, except we're using 21st century technology to do it. But this is exactly what Sir Robert Moray was trying to do for his friend. He's trying to encourage him to be in a better state of mind mentally, and also giving him advice on his physical condition. So firstly, on his physical condition, he writes recipes for certain potions and medicines that Alexander Bruce can have made up locally in Bremen, in the hope that that potion or medicine is going to help his condition. So that's the kind of physical side of things that Sir Robert Moray was trying to do. But he was also, as I say, very keen to try and lift his friend's spirits. And he does this in a variety of different ways. Sometimes he browbeats Bruce for, he implies that he's playing on his illness. He's not, he's not really as ill as he says he is. So he browbeats him for that. But at the same time, he will then uplift him with different stories on different things that he's interested in, as I mentioned, things like fishing or whatever. So he does this whole gambit of what you would probably call today the liberal arts and sciences. But more than that, he talks to Alexander Bruce in his letters about what Freemasonry means to him. Now, he selected a Mason's mark when he was initiated into the Lodge of Edinburgh, This was a common practice and still is in Scotland to this day, where once you have been initiated, passed and raised, more often than not, you will take a mark. You take the mark degree in a Scottish lodge, and in the process, you will select a mark that is unique to you as a Freemason. That's the long and the short of it. So every Freemason, every Scottish Freemason that takes his mark degree has his mark. I'm going to show you Sir Robert Moray's mark now because it's important. And I'm sorry that I didn't have a time to create a full PowerPoint presentation for you. But at least you'll get to see, and David can release the screen sharing function so that I can share this image with you. So David needs to unfreeze the screen sharing. Okay.
Try now. Try now. It should be okay now.
Okay, there we go. So this is Sir Robert Moray's mark, and every time he was, you can see it okay, can you? Everybody see it all right?
Just expand to the full screen if it's possible, or make it smaller so we can see full shape in a picture. Maybe
If you zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
Is
Zoom
that
out a
better?
little bit.
No.
No, it didn't
Nope.
change.
Yeah.
It's showing that it's 182%.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that. I'm not
Down
that.
in the bottom right corner, you can shift that slider a little bit to the left.
All right, got you. Got you. Good. Every day is a school day. Is that better? Do you see that? Let me just.
Not yet.
No.
Actually, I don't
Do
see
you
your
see where it
mouse moving.
says 182%?
Yeah, I'm trying to reduce it so to. No, I think what we'll do is we'll resort to the image rather than the PowerPoint. So can you see that?
It's not moving. It's just stuck there.
Right. I think we're just going to have to.
Yeah.
I just put it in the middle of the screen. How's that? Can you see that?
Should be fine. I think we see everything, so the rest is fine.
All right. Is that better? You see that? Oh. Anyway, the main thing is that you get to see it. Sorry, my technical ability is not terribly great, as you can tell. But then I suppose that's what Masonic historians are like. They're pretty useless. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this is Sir Robert Moray's mark. It's actually, it should be the middle point that's pointing to the top left should actually be pointing directly up. For some reason, the image itself is slightly round the wrong way. So I'll just leave it with you. Anyway, so Sir Robert Moray, this is his mark. He chooses it for all sorts of reasons personal to him, and these are explained in his letters to Alexander Bruce. From this point, from the time of his initiation to the time that he's writing these letters to Alexander Bruce, he always signs his name and with this image as part of the letter Y in his name. So it forms the tail. So these letters, they're written in 1657 to 1659. So you can see that his friend is stuck in Hamburg for the best part of 2 years, which is why there's well over 100 letters sent by Moray. And he talks, not, as I say, not only about medicine and all these things that interest him, but he talks a lot about Freemasonry. what his main point, and of course he's quite conscious that Bruce is not a Freemason. Bruce, as far as we know, never joins a lodge, never joins a Scottish lodge at all. But Moray is quite happy to explain to his friend what this symbol means to him in particular. He talks a little bit about Freemasonry, but he gives nothing away in terms of the initiation ceremony that he and Alexander Hamilton experienced. So he's clearly conscious that there are some things he can talk about and some things he cannot. And he talks about his personal experience and what things mean to him, but he doesn't give away anything that the lodge did during the course of the ceremonies. So this pentacle, or he calls it a star, and I think that's deliberate. I mean, it is a pentacle or pentagram, but he calls it a star, S-T-A-R-R, because a star has a particular significance to him. Now, we know that when it comes to symbols, quite often the circle is used to indicate immortality, something that never ends, the infinite. Well, the star to Sir Robert Moray is exactly the same. And if you look very carefully at the image, you will see that as in a circle, the lines never end. And he's been very clever the way he's drawn this. You can see that the lines go over and under each other. So like the circle, there is no start point and no end point to any of these lines. Now, and he explains that. He explains this is the reason. So this is a very complicated way of talking about immortality. And we do know that Moray was a very educated man. He was a Presbyterian, but he was also a Stoic. He was very learned and he understood the Greek language. And he was a follower of Epictetus, who was probably one of the most famous Greek Stoic philosophers. So here we have a Presbyterian Stoic giving his explanation of a symbol that he's using to demonstrate immortality or infinity. But he goes further, and you can see that he's added some letters, and these are Greek. These are in Greek. Now, I'm not a Greek language specialist, but
Did Bob's
Scott,
screen freeze?
Scott, do you hear me?
I hear you.
So I guess it's on the Robert side.
I believe that Robert's screen has frozen.
Yes, yes. Okay, let me tell him. Okay, I thought something went wrong with me. Just a second. His connection maybe. Oh, okay, he's back. He's back. Robert, are you back? Are you with us? I'll stop the screen sharing. Yeah, you're on the device, I guess. Stop participant sharing. Okay, yeah, can you speak and the screen should change?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. The other device is on, right?
Yeah. So if you can see me and hear me, we're back. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
I
Okay,
know,
we can use
yeah,
that
I
way
know,
and then switch off later when you don't need the screen. You just switch off the device and it should go off.
right. You don't need, you want the image back?
Oh, okay. So all fine now. All fine now.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, the internet, my internet connection was cut. I don't know why. I think there's a lot of people staying at home just now, so so the internet's getting overloaded. Anyway, so right, so we get. I don't know quite where you lost the connection, but I was talking about this is Sir Robert Moray's star, and he has drawn it in such a way that the lines that make up the star are never ending. Right, so this for him this this represents infinity or immortality. Um, so again, it's a very personal interpretation. As I say, most people would simply use a circle, but he's gone to this really extravagant length to depict infinity in his own way. Now, we're talking about what he does with these Greek letters. Translated, they simply mean love and brotherly love at that. And so we have a relationship between a fairly elderly man, Moray, and a younger man, Bruce, which is a platonic and intellectual relationship. There is absolutely no sexual connotation at all in this friendship. That would have been abhorrent to both individuals. But anyway, that's my opinion. So what he's done is he has used this image of infinity to represent the infinity of brotherly love as he understands it from his initiation into this lodge. So brotherly love is infinite. It's not just restricted to Sir Robert Moray and his friend Bruce, but it is Masonic brotherly love is infinite and never ending. So that's the connotation of this symbol. And as I say, for over 2 years, he talks about this regularly with his friend Bruce. So once Bruce is better and goes home, Robert Moray is also very quickly, soon after, is very quickly allowed to leave Maastricht, and he goes back home. He goes back to London, where he's given accommodation in the King's Palace. That again is, this is Charles that we're still talking about. When we, a little bit later than this, we have this. Of course, there's a lot going on in England. I don't want to give you a long history lesson about England and Scotland, but essentially the Roundheads win the Civil War, and a form of parliamentary democracy is established with Oliver Cromwell as the Lord High Protector. Cromwell dies in 1658, which is why almost certainly both Bruce and Moray are able to come home, and they get back. And because of Cromwell's death in 1658, the monarchy is restored, and of course Charles by this time is dead, but it's Charles II, his son, that is now on the throne. And Moray is given accommodation by that king in the Palace of Westminster, where he takes over a laboratory that was owned by a fellow Scot, whose name I'll be able to tell you in a minute. But he takes over. Yes, he's given a guy called David Ramsay, who was using the same accommodation as a laboratory. He was a clockmaker to Charles I. Anyway, So, and we know that Moray settles in to this Palace of Westminster. He's working in his laboratory, which we know from his writings are equipped with furnaces. He only describes one particular experiment in detail, and that was to try and make some kind of medicine that's going to help the plague, which, as we all know, descends on London, the Great Plague of London in 1665. The people decide it's time to leave, or those that could leave, decide to leave London to escape the plague. And Moray manages to find accommodation in the home of Samuel Kem, a Church of England clergyman in Albury. It's interesting that, and this is where we begin to make connections here, he goes to this Church of England manse in Albury, where he takes up the same accommodation as William Outred. I don't know how you pronounce that, my apologies. And he was an alchemist in residence with that Church of England minister. So what he then describes is what he does in, like so many people, they're isolated, they're away from friends and family, they don't have access to all their own equipment. And Sir Robert Moray starts to pass the time by doing some chemical experiments, as he calls it. And he describes it very specifically, where he's trying to extract lead from a certain ore that's been mined in Wales. And he's trying to extract the lead from this rock brought from Wales and turn it into silver. And so that's what his chemical experiments are. But he does admit at the outset of his experiments that he doesn't expect to make much success out of it. But oddly enough, he actually does succeed in making silver, not a huge amount, but he is able to make silver from this ore. So whether he's actually converting lead into silver, I doubt, but he's found a way of extracting the silver from this ore. And this is, interestingly enough, this is reported to the Royal Society at a later date. But before we leave his alchemical experiments, it's important to know that Thomas Vaughan, and those of you who are interested in this area, Thomas Vaughan, an extremely well-known Hermetic philosopher and alchemist who had been working with Moray in the Whitehall laboratory. And when the plague struck, he also went to Albury, where he meets up with Moray and they continue their experiments together. Now, sadly for Vaughan, Thomas Vaughan, he inhales quicksilver by accident, and that kills him. Mercury poisoning was highly toxic. But during one of these alchemical experiments or chemical experiments, one of our best known Hermetic philosophers and alchemists accidentally kills himself. Moray, ever generous, knows that Vaughan is not rich, has got no money, and in fact, Sir Robert Moray pays for his funeral. Vaughan comes to our attention because he translated one of the most important Rosicrucian texts, which is entitled in English, To His Fame and Confession of the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. So Vaughan had translated that from the original Latin into modern English, and he gave quite an extensive preface to that work. So here you have Sir Robert Moray, a very intelligent individual who is very closely associated with someone who's an apologist for Rosicrucianism. However, we've got to be very careful not to read too much into this, because Vaughan himself says he is not a Rosicrucian. He is defending the rights of Rosicrucians to study the way they want to study. So this is a reaction or a defense. It's a reaction against the authorities trying to impose their belief system on people who are interested in such things as Rosicrucianism and Hermeticism. So the claim that Sir Robert Moray was a conduit in some way for Rosicrucianism into Freemasonry, I think is probably doubtful, but we've still got to take note of that fact, because this is a time when everything was in flux. The scientific method hadn't really been introduced. It was, in fact, later introduced by the Royal Society. Before we leave Sir Robert Moray and go on to talk a little bit about the Royal Society, I want to just mention that one of the meetings that Sir Robert Moray goes back to in the lodge in Edinburgh was to attend the initiation of the King's physician, a chap called Maxwell, Dr. Thomas Maxwell. So he's initiated into the Lodge of Edinburgh in 1667, 1647, not long after Sir Robert Moray himself, 6 years later. Maxwell is a noted Hermeticist and alchemist also. So the connection of these intelligentsia who are interested in these things also takes place in a Masonic setting. So it's not just in their laboratories or in their private life or in their letters to each other. They actually take these people into Freemasonry. The extent of which their influence on, we're not ever going to know for sure. But we have to take account of the fact that we've got these Hermeticists and Rosicrucians, or Rosicrucian apologists, should make that clear, running around within the very early Masonic lodges in Scotland. The amount of research to be done on that dimension, I think, is substantial. It's probably not going to ever be completed in my time, but certainly we can start the ball rolling. And so that's why I'm grateful for the suggestion from the guys in Turkey and in South America for asking me to talk on this subject, because it's re-energized my interest in the subject. So Sir Robert Moray, we know he's very involved in all sorts of different things, particularly symbolism and the meaning of things. So when the Royal Society is first discussed by members of the intelligentsia in 1660 at Gresham College in London, in fact, in the meeting rooms of a professor of geometry, another little interesting possibility, a professor of geometry called Lawrence Rook. Immediately after this meeting, it's followed by a lecture given by Christopher Wren. And during the various conversations they have, it's mentioned that, well, you know, there really is no forum for discussing whether anything's actually true or false, etc., etc. To cut a long story short, 12 of those people who met at Gresham College, they decide they're going to try and form a society, and between these 12, they decide they're going to draw up a list of 40 suitable gentlemen who would be invited to join this new society. So here you have Sir Robert Moray, Freemason, and lo and behold, his good friend Alexander Bruce, by now the second Earl of Kincardine. The two of these who are members of the Lodge of Edinburgh, one of those, Sir Robert Moray, and his good friend, whom he's explained Freemasonry to, are now members of this very early stage of forming the Royal Society. So they draw up a list of 40 eminent gentlemen that should be invited to join this new society. And one of those 40 is Elias Ashmole. So Elias Ashmole, if you like, is also a Freemason, according to his diaries at least. And so now we begin to see that this very important scientific body, later called the Royal Society, has Freemasons in it right from the very beginning. And this is where we can see that Sir Robert Moray's influence is extremely important, because it's him as an individual that petitions the king for a charter to make the society the Royal Society. That is under the direct patronage of the king of the country. And that request to his king is granted, and the Royal Society is born. And Sir Robert Moray, as I say, Freemason and member of the Lodge of Edinburgh, is the first president. So what the Royal Society has done is it begins to establish what we now call the scientific method, where experiments are conducted and an attempt to establish the truth of something by repeated experimentation begins. Up till that point in time, and for some, to be fair, admittedly, for some considerable time afterwards, practically anything was up for grabs. You could investigate the occult, fairies, mermaids. All these subjects were legitimate subjects of inquiry by the Royal Society. But over time, experience begins to show that experimentation shows what is possible and what is impossible. And so for me, this is where Sir Robert Moray is very important, in the sense that he carries forward this investigative way of looking at the world. He's already experienced the Hermetic and the alchemical way of looking at the world. And now with the Royal Society, he's becoming a much more rigorous investigator of the world. And as I say, he's instrumental in giving birth to the Royal Society, which is still with us today and is one of the preeminent scientific bodies in the world. So again, another reason to admire Sir Robert Moray and to investigate him and his Masonic connections. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening. I hope you found that to be of interest. It was a little bit stuttery, but let's hope that you found something worthwhile listening to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for a very interesting lecture. My Zoom is also going crazy somehow. I don't know why. Today is quite a strange day with that. So once again, this topic, very interesting one regarding Sir Moray's history and the Royal Society, has been requested by our Turkish brothers and brothers from South America, like Chile, Argentina, Peru, and other jurisdictions together in a combined letter from these jurisdictions. So first of all, I'll ask them to take floors and make the questions they wanted to clarify. They wanted to learn more. So meanwhile, they are getting ready for this. Troy, please unmute yourself and floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Brother Cooper. That was excellent. Just a couple of things I observed, and lots of, because I travel and lecture quite a bit on the subject of esotericism and occultism. And it's fascinating to see you show how at the founding of the Royal Society, these, what I would call forgotten sciences or Hermetic sciences, at the time, they weren't forgotten sciences, they weren't Hermetic sciences, they were just science. And science hadn't coalesced itself around the physical, rational areas that it has now. And the Royal Society has been pivotal in that. but there was a lot of knowledge that would now be considered occult that at the time, all those men of science were practicing that. Ashmole himself published the most important treatise on alchemy in English, the Theatricum Chemicum Britannicum. Why do you think that the rational physical sciences sort of took precedence and took the scientific imagination and ran forward when all these other, I would call them the meaningful sciences, or the sciences of applying meaning, which were common amongst deists, but just kind of fell out of favor, so much so that now Freemasonry, probably the most eminent deist organization on the planet, if you bring up occult or esoteric subjects, most brethren, they don't want to even talk about it. Well, that's not Freemasonry. Go join the SRIA or SRIC, or go talk to the Scottish Rite people. We don't want to hear about any of that over here. What is that? What is that about? Can you shed some light, maybe?
There's all sorts of strands in there, I think part of this is Moray's own religious beliefs, his experience in life. He lost his wife in terrible labour, which killed her and the child. But he was a Stoic, and so Stoicism, the essence of Stoicism, basically says the things that you cannot control, you simply, there's no point in worrying about them. They're going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. If you worry about what's is beyond your control, you're going to be miserable. So focus on what you can control. And so Stoic philosophy in some ways could inform a scientist centuries later by saying to them, well, look, stop looking at things that you can't do anything about. You can't do anything about the tides. You can't do that kind. You can't stop weeds growing. So there's no point in worrying about that. What you worry about is what you have control over. So in some ways, that's what the scientific method is about, isn't it? I mean, I'm being very simplistic here, but then you've got the other social upheavals of the time. You've got the English Civil War, followed British Civil War, followed very quick, and that's a religious war as well as a political war. Then very quickly after that, you have the Great Plague of London, the Black Death, and then very quickly after that, you have the Great Fire of London. And so the answers that perhaps pre-Royal Society people, the things they saw were horrific, mass deaths from religious wars, from plague, etc., that perhaps the church's view of the world just didn't seem to be valid anymore. The accepted way of the world was called into question in short order, one after the other. War, death, fire. It must have shattered all sorts of illusions about a stable society. So that may have been sort of like an emotional impulse for the scientific method. As to what we've lost within Freemasonry today, I think you're absolutely right. We no longer look at the esoteric, dare I say it, the spiritual elements of Freemasonry anymore, and that is partly due, I think, to the more secular world that we live in. It's also part of our educational system, where looking at religion as a valid subject has now virtually disappeared from the school curriculum. You quote, people who can quote the Bible tend to be people of my age, or our age, shall we say. So the whole background today is completely different. Society is completely different from the time that people, and we've talked about this, from the time that the original rituals appear. So understanding the hermetic, esoteric, spiritual elements of Freemasonry, nobody, except for a limited number, I have to say, who take the time and trouble to investigate that. That's why people simply aren't interested. They don't have the knowledge or the ability to discuss it. And I mean, like you, I've seen it. You go to a lodge, can we talk a little bit about the esoteric content of the second degree? And you just see eyes glazing over all around the lodge. What are you talking about? You know, let's get down and get a beer. You know? So that's unfortunate, but there's a whole host of reasons for that. But yeah, good question.
Troy, anything? You're okay?
Well,
okay.
I mean, I could follow that up. Like one of the things I'll point out to the people in the room is that at the time Freemasonry was on the ascendant during this very tumultuous time, especially in England, but United Kingdom in general. Everything that we were discussing at that time was cutting edge. This was all very marginal, thin edge of the wedge, cutting edge material, and now. Part of our attraction is this is an anachronism, and I want to know when did we sort of turn our back on looking at this cutting edge of religious tolerance and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's true everywhere, and there are lodges here and there that might buck that trend, but I mean the exception proves that the rule is the case, and I just want to know, you know, it may be in this room that kind of falls on deaf ears. There again, we're a bunch of academics in here, but I just find it fascinating that here we're talking about all these guys that were the leading minds at the time, and they were all interested in getting together and talking about this stuff, and now. You know, we want to serve pancake breakfast and that sort of thing. I don't get me wrong. I love my craft. I want to know why can't we talk about this?
Well, as I say, I think it's quite simple. A lot of our members don't have the ability, don't have the interest, and that's down to the society in which we live. I mean, let's be brutally frank. The capitalist system doesn't have any time for airy-fairy Rosicrucian hermeticism. How does that lead them to make a healthy profit for the corporation and for the shareholders? And so, you know, these kind of subjects, even associated subjects like ordinary history is slowly but surely disappearing from the curriculum. Study of the classics, of Greek, Roman, Egyptian, all that it's now a minority academic subject. These are all tiny little things, whereas before it was one of the largest areas of study at university. So the times have changed substantially, and with that educational system no longer teaching these subjects, people simply aren't equipped unless they teach themselves. Our members today simply aren't equipped to discuss that with anyone. And that's why they don't want to know. You know, you're talking about something I don't understand and I've got no knowledge of. I'm afraid it's brutally frank.
Yeah. You know? No, thanks, Robert. I like to hear it put in those terms. You know.
Yeah, and let's also be brutally frank as well that the leaders of the craft, and I'm not going to point any fingers, but the leaders of the craft don't educate the membership. They don't offer any education whatsoever. If you want to be educated about Freemasonry, go to Amazon.com. And that's where you will get your Masonic education from, you know. And that's sad. That really is quite sad, because we've got non-Masons writing books about Freemasonry that we buy, and then we suddenly think, oh, I know all about Freemasonry because a non-Mason's told me about it, and I've lined his pockets in the process. You know,
Right.
So,
when all the leading Masonic scholars aren't Freemasons, you know, it's an interesting commentary. I appreciate your thoughts on the subject, and I also appreciate rooms like this where these things can be discussed, because it's my intent to kind of push and prod. I kind of confront this difficulty just by being out there about my interests, and you know, maybe I take advantage of the tolerance of Freemasonry in order to push my own agenda, which is, you know, every person should be exploring this aspect of themselves, because, you know, the 7 liberal arts and sciences aren't the end, but even that, like you point out, Brother Cooper, who really studies formal rhetoric any longer? And you can see it in our political discourse and whatnot. So thank you very much for your commentary.
Sure, my pleasure.
Definitely. Floor is very liberal in this particular room, especially. So you can put out your personal agenda, which is quite very interesting, as we discussed last time. And about the non-Masons writing about the Masonic stuff. If we remember, some exposés have been written by them, which have served quite an interesting sources for Masons later on to write based on the exposés and interpreting something from those, even saving or preserving something. So everything has its own role, I guess. So I guess Abraham wants to follow up on this issue that Troy has raised. And Abraham, if you are here, just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear?
Yes, you're here.
Yeah, so Brother Bob started to very quickly touch on it, and that is that I guess that's what the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite is, and that's the answer you're going to be told, that if you want to
you have to mute the other device, I guess. Something is repeating your voice.
Hold on a second. Let me turn that off. Hold on. Let me see if I can get rid of that device. All right, is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite is the place you go to get the esoterics, and the Blue Lodge is where you go to do business.
Okay. In your part of the world, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes.
I say that because the Scottish Rite didn't appear in Scotland until the 1850s.
Right.
And so I think the question that Troy was asking is, you know, when did we stop talking about the esoteric? And I suppose the second part is, when did that kind of esoteric discussion go to the Scottish Rite?
Yeah, I would here in North America, the advent and the importation of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, it just gave a new degree system and a new outlet for the capitalist mindset of the higher ups in the fraternity to say, okay, the craft lodge will be a business for conferring the symbolic degrees, and after you finish the craft lodge, go explore the York Rite, go explore the Scottish Rite if you want more esoterics, and it was a way for more money.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, because if people were busy doing other things within Freemasonry, they weren't sitting in the lodge looking in depth at what the lodge was doing and what the ritual meant. They were busy claiming the greasy pole up to the 33rd degree. That might well be the accidental consequence of the Scottish Rite's arrival by making the esoteric element of the craft lodge less relevant. Because I mean, there's only so much time in the day, and if you're attending everything in the Scottish Rite and everything in the York Rite, you're not sitting in the lodge saying, well, what does that word mean? So yeah, that's a good point. Never thought about it like that before.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why side orders are such a big thing, especially here in North America. All the, litany list of different side orders that you can join. And I know I'm going to catch flack from some of my Florida brothers here because we all belong to all of them. But, you get different esoterics from each of the appendant bodies. And especially when you start dabbling into the Allied Masonic degrees, when you go into the orders of Athelstan and various other side orders. I mean, there's endless amounts of esoterics that you can do. But I think that the short end of it, Troy, is that for us here in North America, it probably the interest in esotericism within the craft lodge probably left the craft lodge when the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite came and said, okay, if you want the esoterics, come to college, come to university, which is what we are, and you can get the esoterics here.
Yeah, well, that's why, I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about trying to understand the esoteric content of the earliest rituals, that we discussed a couple of weeks ago? Or
yes, it was 3 weeks ago. Around.
Yeah, but you see, the problem is that those very early rituals are virtually unknown. I mean, to be fair, they are obscure in the sense that they are handwritten rituals that are stuck in various archives, so they're hard to get hold of and hard to study. But there is very definitely esoteric content there. But again, you speak to guys today. Oh, I don't want to talk about old rituals. I just want to talk about how we're going to pay the next insurance bill. And I know it's important, but it kind of squeezes the time that you've got to discuss what I would consider to be important things. There we go. That's
Thank you.
What is the earliest ritual that is, to your knowledge, what is the earliest ritual that we actually have record of?
Oh, that's the Edinburgh Register House manuscript. It's 1696, so it's a little bit, it's after Moray's time, it's after the Royal Society's been founded, but it's quite clear from that ritual that it's being copied from somewhere else. So that, that kind of means that and we know from things like the Shaw Statutes, he's telling them to remember what's gone before. And so we know that there's a substantial amount of stuff that's being memorized. It's only when we get towards the end of the 17th century that you have more educated people probably who think, well, I'm going to write some of this down. I don't have to memorize it all. And that's almost certainly how the early rituals come about. But even then, they're fairly incomplete. But in my opinion, if you start at the beginning with those rituals and then you look at developments subsequent to that, you can learn a lot. But nobody explains any of this to the members, you see. That's the problem. As I say, they buy a book on Amazon and they know it all.
Okay, thank you so much, Troy. Let's give floor first to Christian Torres, and then we come back to you.
Hello there. Good afternoon, Brother Bob. Thank you for your very good presentation. And yes, well, my initial question was to ask you on the where we can find this esoteric information or from the early days, but I guess you answered. It's Amazon.
Some of it, unfortunately, and this is the only downside that I can see from using Zoom. I mean, obviously, there's quite a lot that we simply can't go into in a public forum,
Sure.
unfortunately.
Right.
So although I can sort of hint or guide you in certain directions, I can't discuss it in detail. And
No.
so that's one of the presentations that can really only be given in a tiled lodge, basically. So
We should have another one where we can discuss this.
well,
And
it has to be secure though. I think
yes.
Zoom are working on end-to-end encryption, just like WhatsApp. I hear, I don't know if it's true or not, but if they're going to have end-to-end encryption like WhatsApp, then that would be a game changer for discussing sensitive things. Put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, but still,
Well,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
No.
Christian, floor is yours. Go ahead.
No. Just well, that was my initial question, and now I have some curiosity about the fact that he was Robert Moray was a spy, and there's not much said. So if you have any other information about that,
Yeah,
thank you, brother.
once I finish the paper that I left a while ago, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm just being lazy by not doing it, to be honest.
You're not
so.
lazy at all. We are enjoying a lot of your time, and you're doing great job for every participant, I think. And not only because the recordings are being watched every day, the numbers are going and going up. And I receive a lot of feedback, positive feedback, that your lectures are, all the recordings that are put out there is so interesting and informative to so many people. And so you're not lazy at all. At least I don't think so. I hope participants will agree with me.
Yeah.
So, Christian, thank you. And Aubrey, floor is yours, brother.
Thank you. First of all, superb as ever, Robert, lecture. Thank you very much. Coming back onto the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, the Grand Lodge of Chile here in Chile use that particular ritual. I'm initiated in of course, Grand Lodge of Scotland, but for interest, I affiliated to a Grand Lodge of Chile Lodge in my hometown, and they have this.
Mm. Okay.
I don't know if you can read it, but I'll read it to you. It's made by a fellow called, written by a fellow called Oswald Worth.
Oh, right, okay.
And they have a full book for the apprentices. Another one for the fellow craft. Another one for the master mason. All full of the sort of stuff that you've been talking about. And I find it astonishing. Personally, I don't enjoy it. I much prefer Grand Lodge of Scotland Freemasonry but it's a fact of life that to progress through the various degrees under this ancient and accepted Scottish rite within Chile. This is formally published, translated by Worth's document, was translated into Spanish and then amended to make it suitable for Chilean use. I find it difficult to believe that some poor apprentice has got to spend months and months and years before he's accepted sufficiently to become a fellow craft. Then he goes to the same book or another book all over again, and then the Master Mason. Result being that I've noticed, particularly in the lodge here, the dropout rate of initiates or members is huge. It's huge, which is completely different, of course, to Grand Lodge of Scotland's system. I mean, theoretically, within a month, I suppose it is the minimum. I can't remember, Bob, but theoretically, you could be an apprentice, and a month later, you could be a Master Mason.
I think it's got to be a month between. In Scotland, it's got to be a minimum. But yeah,
you know,
it's a lot quicker than
comparison.
Yeah.
In comparison.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Aubrey. Can I intervene, or you have something to add?
Yes, by all means, carry on. I finished. I just wanted to make the comment about the ancient and accepted Scottish rite.
That's what we perform here in Georgia as well. So before I give the floor to Troy again, there are two questions which I received. One I received from Brother Istvan, who is here, but I received it by email days ago, so I have to read it here. Then I'll have another which is in the chat. So the first question from Brother Istvan is that whether they have, or you in that case, Bob, in Scotland, in the craft lodges, chamber of reflection or not? That's the first question.
The short answer is no. Most lodges don't have that, but some do. And the problem when we're talking about Scotland is that it's up to the lodge to decide these things. So every lodge in Scotland can have its own ritual. So there is no standard ritual for Scottish lodges. So in theory, I mean, I remember, I'm the founder member of Lodge Edinburgh Castle, past master there. But when the lodge was being founded, they formed a committee to decide what ritual they were going to have. And so they took some ritual from one lodge, but then they rewrote or added new ritual to the existing one. So you have a situation where in Scotland, it's not possible to tell a lodge, this is what you must do. Some lodges very deliberately choose not to have a chamber of reflection. Some lodges do. And you have other lodges that they will use the idea of a lodge of reflection or a chamber of reflection completely separate from the lodge meetings. And that's entirely under the control of the proposer and seconder. So the short answer is it depends on the lodge in Scotland.
And it's their own choice. Okay, I think the question is answered. Istvan, you are here, and if you want to add up something or make it any clarification question or something, you're more than welcome. Please do so. Before that, we received the question here by Erjan. David, I have a question. Okay, at the beginning there was one or a couple of lodges, groups, etc. But in time, until now, the organization grew in numbers, and also the numbers of different rites increased. What do you think about this diversity in rites? Does this cause important problems regarding relationships between brothers in different rites? Or the main essence to be protected is esotericism in the craft? Thank you.
Well, in some ways, Freemasonry has been a victim of its own success, hasn't it? I think part of the development, if you like, is natural in the sense that you've got, if all you have are 3 degrees at lodge level, you can only have one master of the lodge per year. Whereas when you have a Grand Lodge, then all of a sudden you've got another avenue that you can explore. So what's happened is, I think that as more and more people have joined Freemasonry, they all want to be involved. They don't want to just sit and watch the degrees being performed. They want to participate somehow or other. And so in order to accommodate more and more people joining, more and more ceremonies have been invented. And I use that word deliberately, invented. And that's because, I think I mentioned this before, Scottish Freemasonry, and indeed other orders that are not Masonic, like the Free Gardeners, the Free Fishermen, the Horsemen, the Free Carters, the Hammermen. These organizations developed directly from a working man's daily life. So a stonemason, they got together and they created their ceremonies based on their experience of working during the day on a church or castle or whatever. In the same way, gardeners got together as groups and used their experience of horticulture to develop ceremonies based on what they did during the day. And so that went on and on and on throughout Scotland, and all sorts of trades developed their own ceremonies based on what their working lives were. That's quite unlike anywhere else in the world, as I understand it, where, for example, the Oddfellows, the Shepherds, the Foresters, all these organizations are pure invention. Gentlemen with leisure time decided that they didn't want to join the Freemasons. They wanted to have their own organization so that they could be in charge of it. They could be the Grand Master. So they invented these organizations like the Oddfellows, etc. So that's a sharp contrast between Scotland and particularly England, where Scotland were using actual working knowledge, practical knowledge to devise ceremonies, whereas in England, they were pure invention, not based on anybody's practical experience. So I think there is a research project up for grabs here. Are the other branches of Freemasonry, such as the Scottish Rite, and indeed most of the York Rite, in fact, yeah, nearly all of it, are these pure invention for a similar purpose? Don't get me wrong, they're all very worthy, but unlike the first 3 degrees, which spring directly from the working stonemason in Scotland, are all the other branches of Freemasonry pure invention in order to accommodate ever-increasing numbers of new members? Possible? I mean, if we could look statistically, at the intake of new people into Freemasonry, I think you might find that fairly soon after there's a sudden spike in the development of a new order or a new branch of Freemasonry. You've got to give all these people something to do, and if all there is a craft lodge, that's not enough. So anyway, that's just a thought. It's just a thought. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but it would be worthwhile investigating, I think.
Thank you. Troy, floor is yours, and there are several questions in the chat room, which I will try to read out loud.
You come back to me. This is great. I'm not going to speak on the same topic from before. Brother Cooper, so these earlier rituals was evolved from traditional operative Masonic craft. Are there good works, written works, that will lead a student of the 3 degrees A rather famous brother of mine says he can only count to 3, and so no room for Scottish Rite or York Rite for him. Is there good written work on the mysticism of the birth, life, death cycle of the 3 degrees that we practice that isn't specific to any mystical tradition that you're aware of?
Yeah, there have been a few papers written. Some of them are in the proceedings of Quater Coronati Lodge. There's a few papers in there. I myself have scribbled a few things that go into it a bit, particularly the parallel organization of the 3 gardeners, which followed a very similar esoteric path, and actually were parallel in time with Freemasonry and its development. So sometimes I think, so to answer your question, there are some things like that available, but you've got to dig for them, and perhaps you've got to know where to look for them. That's the problem. And this comes back to the difficulty that you have, that if you are interested in this subject, there's very few places that you can go and ask that question. And I mean, with the best will in the world, you go to your Grand Lodge, I don't know if they would be able to answer that question for you. Some research lodges, like Quater Coronati Lodge, certainly could, but in general, I don't think there is a central point of contact for people who are interested in that aspect. So
the reason I ask is I think that the traditional 3-degree system is a complete system of mysticism unto itself. And in my own practice, I've sort of evolved that and developed that, and I know other Masons that have too. We kind of beat and compare notes. But then we've added so much that our predecessors might have known or might have practiced from the Western esoteric tradition, and I just think Masonry is a particularly useful lens to look at that. Any comment?
Yeah, there's no doubt that when you look at the old rituals, the earliest rituals, it is very, very clear that there's been a lot of tinkering with the rituals over the centuries. All sorts of additions. We can see the addition of certain modern practices. We can tell when they suddenly first appear in the ritual. So you can actually usually tell which decade some elaborations have been made to the ritual. And you can see that over time, these additions have completely buried the esoteric content. I have to say, though, we do live in a day and age where things tend to be taken at a superficial level. Even the best example I can think of off the top of my head is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Say, whether the Good Samaritan lived, what his name was, what his occupation was, how many children he had, all that is irrelevant. It's not necessary for the parable. It's the message that the parable conveys that's important. But nowadays, people tend to look at the pure surface of the story, and the story is all that's important. It's not the actual moral element of the story. And I think we don't teach modern Freemasons. I don't think anymore we teach that the words carry a separate hidden meaning. And that's why we get some guys who are extremely eloquent. They can stand up and they can deliver the ritual word perfect from beginning to end. But you ask them, well, what does it mean? Well, everybody knows what it means. You can read it for yourself, And that's the problem. It's superficial. There's no depth. There's no explanation of what words mean. And more importantly, in my opinion, there is no explanation as to why linking a series of words together make them important. So we have this basic idea, look, here's a book, that's the ritual, learn it, and if you learn it well, you'll understand it. And that's the presumption that we have, that if you learn it, you will understand it. And that's just a way of, that's a cop-out, it's a way of people not having to explain it, because it's all written down in the book. And if you can't understand it, then that's your fault, not mine. You know, that's the attitude, unfortunately. Yeah.
So the questions in the chat room. Norman is here with us, but as he wants me to read it, I understand he hasn't raised his hand. Bob, what is the law? Oh, Norman, please go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, floor is yours.
I'll take it. I'll take it. It gives me an opportunity again to say thank you to Bob for giving us terrific entertainment and education, and I'm so grateful, as I'm sure all the participants, you know, are for everything you do. So please keep doing it. I've got two questions. I think they're fairly short. In England, Mark Masonry is a completely separately organised degree. So unlike, as you've explained, in Scotland, the entry to Mark may be through the craft, it may be through the Royal Arch. In England, it is a completely separate degree, and it's one that I have joined, but only really in the last 4 years, so I'm a very inexperienced Mark Mason. My understanding is that the triangle is never a mark which can be chosen by a fellow craft, because that's an overseer's item of recognition, of approval, a stamp of approval. The pentagram is almost entirely triangles, which seems a little bit at odds to what I've learnt so far. So can you shed some light on that, please? Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, I've just been talking about things coming out of a Scottish working experience, a daily working life, and the mark is probably the classic example of that, albeit a bit later. We know that what actually happened with the mark in England was about 8 or 9 guys from Aberdeen went to London to confer the degree on some Freemasons in London. And of course, they got a Scottish charter. And all of a sudden, Mark lodges started appearing all over England with charters from a Royal Arch chapter, oddly enough, called Bon Accord in Aberdeen. They were given charters by this Royal Arch chapter, and they started to appear all over England, particularly in places like Lancashire and Cheshire. That was the impetus for forming the Mark Grand Lodge of England and Wales, because they obviously, and probably correctly, wanted to control what was happening on their territory, so to speak. But the mark, and now we're talking about the Masons, the Moray's mark made up of the triangles. Is that what you're referring to, his mark?
Yes, the image that you put up in your presentation was the pentagram, and that was triangle upon triangle upon triangle, apart from a little image sort of, in the center. But that seemed to be too many triangles, and therefore at all what I've learned. So.
I think the difference is that he doesn't use anything that's an equilateral triangle. That's the difference. It's the equilateral triangle that's crucial to the mark. So he didn't use that. He didn't use that kind of triangle.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Thank you. My second question, probably even shorter. The image that you have in your background, can you explain what lodge that is, what time period, and where it's located?
Yeah, that's a photograph that was taken in 1904 in Lodge Waverley 597 in Edinburgh, here in Edinburgh. And what it was there was a travelling vaudeville act called the William Walker Company from New York. Were travelling Britain, and when they were in Edinburgh, all 9 of them were initiated into that lodge in 1904, as I say. Very famous black actors and musicians. They had a summer season, as they called it here in Edinburgh, at the King's Theatre, I think it was, where they performed June, July, and August before going home. And that's the photograph after the initiation ceremony. I think that would be, I think it was in June 1904.
Brilliant. Thank you. Very interesting as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just went through all the texts and comments. There are some simple discussion, simple to the. I mean, the participants are responding to each other, so I don't see those questions are like about one-day Masons are too much of relevance for the discussion, because there are some who are made in one day to the highest degrees. So. Yeah, that was following up of the discussion that this esoteric part is being kind of getting lost in between. And what about those one-day guys? Okay, so I think again we made it. Oh, sorry, Aubrey, floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yes, can I make a quick comment about the
Go ahead.
Pentagon? My grandfather was a Mason, as I mentioned before, in Scotland. I think he was initiating in a lodge in Preston Pans. But on his watch chain, he always wore the pentagon. I'm pretty certain, although I'm not a member, but I think it's related to the Royal Arts degree and used by the Royal Arts degree these days in Scotland.
Yeah, it's actually it's actually the Excellent Master's degree.
Excellent Master,
yeah, so it's possible in a Royal Arts chapter in Scotland to take 3 degrees, the Mark degree, if you haven't already taken it in Lodge. You have to take it in the Royal Arts chapter. And then it's the
We do in Chile.
Oh, you're doing Chile, right? But for whatever reason, the Mark been explaining, but it's not that long ago, something like 30, 40 years ago, the Excellent Masters was dropped from the Royal Arch series. And so you only take the Royal Arch degree when you go to a Royal Arch chapter in England. I think Bristol still have the Excellent Masters though, but that's my understanding anyway.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sadly, that watch chain, which was made from the braided hair of my grandmother, he gave it to his son, and the house was robbed and it was stolen. Tremendous loss for the family. But I still have a photograph of him with it on.
Yeah, oh well. Unfortunate, but okay.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey. Abraham, floor is yours. And yes, we have like 10 more minutes, and we are exactly in 2 hours today. Early beer.
Perfect. Yeah. With permission from Brother Bob, if he would entertain a kind of off-topic question. So the other day I got into a rather heated discussion with one of these clandestine organization people, and it started going back to the question of birth right or birth certificate, or what he basically was getting at is who authorized the lodges in Scotland. And what I tried to essentially explain to this individual is that because basically what he tried to allude to is that it came from the Moors and from Egypt. And I said, look, we're talking about the organization of Freemasonry, not Masonry. We're talking about Freemasonry. And Freemasonry started it started in Scotland, and there's documentation to prove it. And the question keeps coming back to, well, who started the first lodge, or where did it come from? So I know we've had these discussions before, Brother Bob. Maybe you can revisit it and kind of take me back to that place so I can be better equipped to answer these questions.
Well, I think we can answer that fairly easily, because we come back to William Shaw.
Bob, please help with help your mic. It sounds strange.
Okay. All right. I think I just.
Not yet.
Is that better?
Seems good now. Yeah, good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have to go. I could go back to 1475, where the earliest organisation of stonemasons in Scotland was authorised, but that was more of a guild. I therefore think that when we're talking about lodges, we have to go back to William Shaw, who writes to every lodge in Scotland. And of course, he is in many ways acting as a Grand Master by giving them instructions as to what they will do from now on. So, and there's an implied threat that this is what you're going to do from now onwards, or else. So he's cracking the whip. So he's authorizing them to continue to exist, but if they are in any way naughty, he's going to have them. He's going to take their charter away, essentially. He's going to make it illegitimate. So this, and I think this is where this whole idea of legitimacy comes from, where somebody must have authorized these organizations, these lodges, to exist. And I think William Shaw is doing just that. He's saying, okay, you can exist provided you do what you're told, and these are the things that you're going to do. So I think that's where it comes from.
But with Shaw, we're talking again about Freemasonry, not Mason, not the actual craft.
Yeah, we're definitely talking about the craft. We're talking about stonemasons.
Stonemason.
Stonemasons lodges. He writes to them and he tells them, this is what you're going to do from now on. And as I say, there's an implied threat. The difference is, of course, that these lodges over time morph into modern Masonic lodges. Some completely lose. Every single stonemason disappears. In fact, some of them are so annoyed with these non-stonemasons, they up and go away and form another operative lodge. So it's they've been authorized by William Shaw, they've been hijacked by speculative masons, but the legitimacy still exists. That's the point. As long as you've got a continuity from the original authority, Shaw in this case, as long as you've got that continuity, you retain legitimacy, which is why the speculatives didn't form new lodges, they took over existing ones in order to maintain the continuity and therefore the continuity of legitimacy.
Right, because the argument keeps coming back to, well, at some point, the stonemasons stole the knowledge from the Egyptians. In other words, the Egyptians passed it on to the Scottish stonemasons, the skills and the knowledge that was necessary, the geometry and the trigonometry necessary to build these great edifices that were building Europe.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what we've been talking about. You now have confronted the problem of belief as opposed to fact. So if the idea that the Egyptians transferred their knowledge to Scottish stonemasons, I would like to see the evidence that supports that. If there's no evidence, then it's simply an opinion. And an opinion, anybody can have an opinion. But as a Masonic historian, I like to think that I can sort of point people in the direction of supporting evidence rather than just giving a whole load of opinions. And this is, and I understand the attraction of that. That's a lovely romantic story, but we've got to be careful because, as I've said before, if you get carried away with the romanticism of these stories, you're starting from a point of error. You can speculate on things, but if you speculate on basically on opinion rather than fact, you cannot get back to a factual position. All you can do is continue to make errors, because the basis of what you're doing is based on an error or based on something for which no evidence exists. And so it's very difficult. And I mean, you know, as a Masonic historian, I'm very conscious of the problem that this creates, because if I give absolutely cast iron 100% proof that what your friend is talking about is absolute rubbish, should I as a Freemason do that to somebody's beliefs? So it's a quandary. It really is a quandary, because he's entitled to his beliefs. Does that allow me to destroy his beliefs simply because I'm a hard-headed historian? Difficult. Now, if you can discuss that in a friendly way, okay. But
Which I try to do, but again, these discussions get very heated because it all comes back to this issue of legitimacy and clandestine organizations which claim to be legal and have authority. And when I confront them, try to explain that no, your organization is in fact not recognized. It is completely fabricated out of thin air. There's no tracing back to, there's no continuity from anywhere. It was a fabrication out of thin air. Then it comes into these discussions. Well, you European and American Freemasons stole it all from the Egyptians and from the Nubians anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're never. I mean, you can take it even further back than that. I mean, you can take it back to the Neolithic age in Scotland, if you like. So we've got these standing stones scattered all over the country, and so the Neolithic Scots are probably the first people in well, all over Europe, but in Scotland in this case, that were erecting standing stones to mark the solar solstice and the winter solstice and whatever. So they were doing things as well. So maybe the Egyptians stole it from the Scots, you know.
Yeah.
Where are we going to end, you know?
Yeah, we can take it forever. But hey, thanks for entertaining that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And Bob published Post-it. I think that will be better word for that. A very interesting comparison of dervishes and Freemasonry on his personal Masonic author Facebook page, and it is very interesting reading. So I would recommend to go back on Bob's page, and there are many others, but this one was very interesting to read. Someone has the microphone on, so Abraham, I'll mute you now. Frank, Frank W. DW, please, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Abraham, I like to think that Freemasonry is simply evolution of all those ancient things up until the point that the facts or recorded facts are then emerge. Can I just explore one other thing with you, Bob? When William Shaw introduced his statutes, clearly he was putting down a minimum standard. Is there record and evidence of lodges that did actually keep minutes anyway, in spite, before he brought his statutes in place?
No, none at all. And that's almost certainly, the minutes are almost certainly a direct consequence of his statutes. And that's when they suddenly start appearing. Before that, there is nothing at all. But clearly, lodges existed before he introduced his statutes. The very first one, which we read the other week, instructs the lodges to memorize all their previous rules and regulations. And it also refers to these previous lodges, that is the pre-Shaw lodges. It's clear that they're already taking oaths between the brethren, stonemason brethren of these lodges. So just in a couple of sentences, he addresses the issue of these lodges that existed before written records come into being. And I suppose that's, if you don't have to do something, until somebody bigger and meaner than you comes along and tells you you've got to, well, you're not going to bother. All done.
So sorry, I went off.
No more. Okay.
Sorry. Just
looks like David is frozen.
Yes. Do you hear me?
All right, he's back.
Sorry about that. I don't know. I guess our enemies are taking us.
Gave us a chance to talk about you. That's
all. Okay, I will leave you now. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, I think no more questions, and definitely I can leave you alone if you want to talk about anything. So should I wrap up? I think I don't see any hands raised, and that gives me all legitimacy to say that today's lecture is over, and I hope to see you all on it is on Wednesday, and we will have a very interesting topic which has been proposed by Bob. It is about the River Valley Road Prisoners of War Masonic Club. Some brothers have been captured during the World War II, and there were some interesting stories to it. So, of course, all the emails will be sent out again to remind you the same day, early, a few hours earlier than you cannot miss the meeting. So having said that, I will close today's lecture, and I will thank you so much, Brother Bob, and everyone. Cleo, you want to take the floor? Please go ahead.
Just as a reminder for those who came in late, the Masonic Roundtable will be interviewing me, and I will just post it on the date.
Thank you, Cleo.
Okay.
Thank
Good.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, we can just say bye. As usually we do, the room will be open till everyone decides that it is time to go to bed or to work, I guess, somewhere. And the official part is over. It continues recording. It continues alive, and this part is not moderated. You can unmute yourself and speak if you want to, chat, discuss, whatever. Just keep it beyond the jurisdictional issues, beyond politics and religion. That rule remains, and we should be decent and keep the harmony of this group. Thank you. Anyone is
Thanks again,
free to
David,
talk.
and thank you very much, Bob. Very well done. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Well, I'm going to nip to the little boys' room, but I'll come back.
Okay. Okay. The room is open. We won't go.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much, David. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Plamen. Thank you for participating. Okay. Renan, you received the letter by email, right?
Yes, David, I thank you very much. I did nothing, you know.
No, all should be noted, I think, and it is not bad that these people are being helped. And you know what is more interesting? That today I learned that the family that stays, he's here. Tavashan, you're here. Let me introduce Tavashan. This is the head of this young family who stays in my apartment. He's from South Africa. Tavashan, this live is publicly broadcasted, and you are free to talk about what you want or what you feel is right for you to disclose here. But very interesting things I've learned about you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate everything you've done for my family, myself. We feel very welcomed in your country, and really with all the contacts you've helped us repatriate all the South Africans from here back to home. I've got some good news that they all landed in safely and they've been designated to the quarantine zones. So with everybody and all your contacts that you had to leverage for our personal benefit, we really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, heard about that. Well done. Well done.
Very good.
Yes, Tavashan is, yeah, go ahead, please.
May I
Frank.
say something, David? And hello, brothers. My name is Frank Kiefer. I'm here in the wilds of Palm City, Florida. And I really want to express my appreciation to you, David, and what you've done in putting these forums together. And of course, Brother Robert Cooper. They've been really helpful to me and very edifying. Thank you from my heart.
You're most
makes it
welcome.
all
Thank you
worthwhile,
for.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Hello,
No,
Bob.
thank you. Hello, Renan. How are you?
Fine, and you?
Fine, yes, not too bad. Getting older and fatter by the day.
I'm going to send an email to you. Will you please check your mails?
I'll try. The problem is there's so many routes to contact people now. So I've got WhatsApp, Messenger, Facebook, Zoom. And people have started filling in the online form on the website. So I'm getting messages. So there's 5 different ways. So sometimes I'm struggling to keep up with everything. But that's why I'm getting older and fatter.
No, you are getting younger.
Yeah, it's just sitting here eating and typing all the time, you know.
It takes time.
Indeed. Still, there we go.
It's really
So,
beautiful
yeah,
to see a
Brennan,
forum
send-
like this put together. I'm also part of the FM or the GL from Cape Town, Western Cape, the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
With brothers
Yeah.
Ron Selly, our Grandmaster. So it's really nice to see a following across the span of the globe being put together like this. I'm stuck in Georgia at the moment, but it's a beautiful experience under the care of David. So,
I learned about this just few hours ago
yeah,
when we
wow.
started the lecture.
Really,
I didn't know. I just wrote the introductory note to the ambassador of South Africa in Georgia and to Grand Secretary in South Africa. And just to, because there were some technical issues we've been discussing with them. And Tawashan came up with some interesting comments.
Well, that's good. It's good. It's all good stuff.
You
Yeah.
are all
Let's
this
do
small.
something, Bob.
Sorry? You sent it, Brennan.
No. You have seen something.
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask what lodge in Cape Town are you a member of?
The West Coast Lodge with Brother Ron Selly as the Grand Master.
Is that Grand Lodge of South Africa?
Yes, the Grand Lodge of Cape Town, South Africa. Cape Town. It's affiliated to South Africa. But we're
Right,
just
yeah.
a small demographic within the Western Cape, the region of the Western Cape.
Yeah. The reason I ask, I was there in October last year for a 3-week lecture tour. So they had me talking nearly every night. So I was glad to get home. But I went to Cape Town and give a radio interview on Talk Radio 702.
I think I actually remember that, and I remember your voice and your name from there as well. I do.
It's
Amazing.
a very interesting country. Very interesting. Nice people. Nice people.
Thank you.
Yeah, brethren, could I just open a teeny dialogue about something that Aubrey mentioned, which was I think the difficulty placed on candidates before they can move from one degree to another degree. Now, did you say that was something which was peculiar to you in Chile, or is this a general problem? And the reason I ask it is because I'll probably reflect on the differences I've noticed in visit to American lodges in California and our practices here in England.
Well, I can't answer for whether it's peculiar for here in Chile or not. All I know is that the Grand Lodge of Chile use that system. And
you think it's an oppressive system to candidates, which accounts for a lot of fall off?
I personally believe that's the case. I've got a bit of a, what's the best way? I have a strange feeling that it's developed over the years and designed over the years to keep the old members in power and the youngers down.
Which is a great shame. So can I
it is a great shame. I can't say if it's general throughout the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, but it's certainly the case here in Chile.
Okay, so can I give you a little bit of context of what a progressive Mason might expect here in England? And it's actually a very, very low bar. A candidate who is initiated before he's passed to the second degree, he'll be given a short series of questions and answers. The 9 or 10 questions and answers, and he'll be expected to learn the answers, by heart.
Exactly the same as us in Grand Lodge of Scotland.
So it's not a particularly high bar here in the UK. It's the diligence of candidates is very, very mixed. In some lodges, you know, they will answer perfectly. In others, they need one hell of a lot of prompting. In the States, I've visited lodges where I noticed that before a candidate moves to the next degree, he has to go through a catechism session and be quite proficient in a huge number of questions and answers, and the ability to recite his obligation. And that's a much higher bar than we expect here in the UK. We still have fallout from candidates who perhaps find that Freemasonry is not as interesting to them, that they want to persist in it, but the ability to pass to the next degree is not a bar here. Anyway, I thought I would share that with you. It gives us a chance to see how today's Freemasonry is practiced in our various countries.
Thank you very much. Interesting to see the London Fire Brigade fire engine behind you.
Yeah. Okay, do you want me to expand a little bit about that? Okay, so
by all means do so, then I'll make a comment as well.
Okay, so this of course comes down to fundraising, you know, and how do we go about fundraising? In England, fundraising is almost entirely out of our own pockets. Freemasonry does not go into the wider world. It doesn't go to events, have tins, badges, flags, you know, whatever. But because we do have a large number of members in London, we have 1,250 lodges, membership of about 30,000. Yeah, and that gives us the ability to raise something like £1 million per year from our own resources. So in London, our Grand Master, well, the provincial Grand Master has set a number of iconic charities that London Masons, you know, will subscribe to. The latest one, and this is part of it coming into fruition, was born out of the Grenfell fire, the Grenfell Tower fire a couple of years ago, when I think, of course, it was worldwide news, but almost 100 people died when a high-rise building, because of its cladding, was engulfed in flames. In London, we didn't have a very, very high-rise aerial platform to tackle that kind of fire. And in fact, we had to wait for these things to come in from other parts of the country. But the London Freemasons set out just over 2 years ago to raise £2.5 million, and therefore to provide 2 appliances like the one that you see in the picture. And this was actually delivered in March and came into service in March this year. It's got the highest reach. I think it's almost 200 feet. It's got the highest reach of any appliance in Europe. And it's a little bit shy of being equaling the highest reach appliance in the world. And that was parked outside of Freemasons Hall on the day of London's annual meeting in March. So it was a nice little image to capture. That's the background there, Aubrey. So
thank you. Thank you. I'd like to make the comment here in Chile regarding fire brigades. They are all supported by public donations. There is a small amount of money which comes from the government, but the majority is by public donations, and all the firemen are volunteers. And our particular lodge, Lodge Britannia, have made the point for 2 years of making considerable donation. When I say considerable, I'm talking about £500 or thereabouts to one fire brigade company, and another 500 went to another fire brigade company. Why? Because we are, as Masons, a benevolent organisation, not just between ourselves, but to the rest of the community. Bob, you waved your head. I'm wondering if that was an agreement or...
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's. I do have a problem in well, two comments, if you like. I do know that the London fire engine is coming for heavy criticism from trade unions in England, not in Scotland, but trade unions in England, and including the fire brigade's own trade union, have heavily criticised the London Fire Brigade for taking donations from a secret society. And the other problem that I have is that the fire engine in question has a very distinctive and very bold image of the square and compasses thereon. So there's a considerable rethinking going on here about if you give something to charity, you're doing that out of the goodness of your heart without hope of reward. And that's our definition of charity. If we're giving money to charity and receiving something back, like having our logo emblazoned on a fire engine or a helicopter or an ambulance, then we are actually getting something back for our donation. And it's no longer charity, it is sponsorship. And that's the danger. Yeah, well, that's what businesses do. They donate money in order to have their logo on the football ground or in a theatre program or whatever. They get something back. Simple charity is giving money and getting nothing, not even recognition, getting nothing back whatsoever. And that's why I think we have got to be a bit more careful about, or a bit more honest about what we're trying to achieve. If you're giving money to charity and asking for people to thank you for doing so, and making sure the press is there when the fire engine is handed over, making sure that the newspaper reporters are there when that event takes place, taking photographs of it, putting it on social media, etc., etc. It's beginning to stretch the meaning of charity. And so and that's, in some ways, the media have cottoned onto that, saying, well, you know, anyone can give money to charity. Why do we need to report that you've done this? And I think I don't think there's going to be an easy solution to it, but I'm asking you to think about the definition of charity in comparison to sponsorship. And the fact that we get something out of it is part of the problem.
Yeah, Bob, everything you say is...
I'll let you go first, Norman.
Okay. Everything you say is very valid, and and there was resistance. There was even resistance sort of in London Freemasonry. Some of the lodges that I visit in an official capacity were coming back and saying, well, this is almost political because you know, you are donating where the government should be supporting this kind of effort. So this was not without a certain amount, you know, of controversy. In terms of the logo and the visibility, this was not something which was intended to be, well, what fantastic guys, you know, we are, but merely to let the world and the community know that we are here and we are doing something for the community. We don't want anything back. You know, we don't want anything tangible back, but is it so wrong to basically say, well, this was donated to the community by London Freemasons, you know, we are a force for good. I'm in favour of that.
Yeah, let me just before Aubrey jumps in, the problem that creates then is, and I've heard this across from many places, that what you're doing is essentially you're going into competition with every other contributor to charity who say exactly the same thing. We're here to support the community. We don't want recognition, but it's nice if we get it. So you're in direct competition with every other organization, and indeed with businesses, and indeed with local government, all who make contributions that are supposedly charitable contributions. The problem I have with it is that by doing it this way, we're making ourselves the same as everybody else. We are no longer special. We're doing exactly what every other contributor to charity are actually doing. And I think we should be finding a way of being different. We are just simply falling into the trap of, well, we're like a business, or we're like, you know, whatever. And for me, it doesn't feel like we're being special anymore. I don't know, it's not terribly articulate, but that's...
No, Robert, that is completely valid and respected. I don't share the same opinion, because I believe that we should be visible, more visible than we were in the past.
Yeah.
And Freemasons really have never really shouted much about the charitable works that they. But anyway, this is.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose ultimately the next question would be, why do you need to be visible? What do you expect to get out of that increased visibility, whether it's in London or Chile? You see what I mean? So,
is it a bad thing that thinking men and women in London, you know, might sort of, you know, think, well, you know, this is a good organisation to associate myself with. You know,
we get to the crux of it. You're trying to change perceptions. So you're trying to get people to think nice thoughts about you.
I think it's encouraging leadership. You know, okay.
Yeah. But it is but you are now in a transaction situation where you want something, whether you get it or not, it's another matter. But you're hoping that you're going to get something from that activity, and that's why I think you're now moving into the realms of maybe not pure sponsorship, but you're no longer purely charitable either. You are doing something in the hope of reward, which is completely opposite.
Can I come into this subject?
Help!
I have something to say too.
I've got two guys.
Well, the first comment, of course, first comment I'm going to make is that we had tremendous bushfires in Chile 2 years ago, and we made a donation to the central organization, which was just a check sent into them. And this year, or last year, we said, okay, now we haven't got the bushfire problem this time, but the fire companies, individual fire companies in Chile, the majority of them, almost all of them, were set up by individuals. There is the French fire company, there is the British fire company, there is various other fire companies, all set up individually. And I, as it happened, approached the British Fire Company to ask them if they would be prepared to accept a donation from us. One of our other brothers, his father was actually a founder member of this fire company, which is in a very poor area of Chile, very poor area of Santiago. And he did the same. There was absolutely no publicity whatever. There was much thanks, many grateful thanks, a letter of acceptance, of course, because it's nice to have a letter of acceptance. At least it justifies where the funds went, from the Treasurer's point of view. But there was no intention whatsoever of publicity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I mean, I know exactly. I'm just being. I'm playing devil's advocate with Norman here.
Yeah.
It's.
I'm putting the Chilean points outside across. There's no advertising here.
Indeed. Of course, I'm a member of a London lodge, past master of a London lodge, so I get all the information, and it's a magnificent result. And how anyone could criticize the fact that you now have a vehicle that potentially can save all those 100 lives should ever that disaster strike again. It's beyond me. It really is. But you see, some people, I don't know what it is, some people just seem to have somebody to complain about, somebody to moan about, somebody who's at fault, you know. And I think we suit the bill, basically. We're just a very handy whipping boy, sadly.
Yeah.
The Freemasonry in England, I think it's illustrative of the public attitude towards Freemasonry in England, especially now, that a trade union, I don't mean to make this political, but would call out Freemasonry for being non-transparent. I mean, anybody who's had any involvement in trade unions will know the first thing that goes out the window is any kind of transparency. There's nothing more cliquey or inside baseball than a trade union. And for them to be pointing out the sliver in our eye when they've got a lift of lumber in their own by saying, oh, we're looking for public. Now, that being said, had I been involved in a project, I would have recommended that we're not Rotarians. Let's not put our logo on the truck. But I could appreciate the feeling that this is an opportunity to raise the visibility of the craft. I myself don't think raising the visibility of the craft is a good idea. All that it does is raise questions of inclusion, transparency, and classism, which you can see in spades what's going on with the public's attitude towards the craft in England, which is much better now, but has been much worse in recent history. And I think this leads to a larger discussion of, you know, is this a few and secret organization that was co-opted by soldiers after World War II and just blown up to this gigantic organization and now is sort of right-sizing to those of us who are interested in this rather radical idea of, you know, extreme liberal attitudes towards individual spiritual development. You go do what you want. We won't ask questions, you know, this sort of stuff. The world, I think the world needs more Freemasonry, but I don't think Freemasonry is right for everybody. I mean, at one time in North America, 1 out of 3 of us were members of men were members of fraternal organization, and that's not. I'm like 1 in 50 now. And maybe that's a more reasonable size for a society where individuals are doing their own thing all the time. Yeah. Largely, Freemasonry kind of won that war, and you know, shouldn't we just let this right size itself? And why we want to advertise? Why do we want to raise the profile? That's the real question here about this sort of thing.
I think part of it, you know, is particularly on the part of people who attack us. For instance, trade unions are using us as a deflection tactic. Don't look at what we're doing. The bad people are over there. You know, they're called Freemasons. Don't look at us, look at them. And while you're looking at them, we can get on and do what the hell we like. And things got so bad here, and Norman will know of this outfit. It's called Unison, the trade union Unison, which I think is the biggest or the second biggest trade union in Britain. And I've got this. 15 years ago at their annual conference, they passed a rule, a regulation, that henceforth, anyone who applied to join that trade union had to state on their application form whether the applicant was or ever had been a Freemason. And they had to sign that declaration before they could be accepted into the trade union. And I've got that application form. 2 years later, they deleted that rule because they realized that, you know, human rights and all the rest of it. But the point of doing that was simply not because they couldn't check. If I filled in saying I'm not a Freemason, they couldn't check to find out whether I'm not a Freemason. This was a very clever way of telling everybody who wanted to be a member of that union that you shouldn't be a Freemason as well.
Yeah.
So
I think this is fallout of us shying away from the modern argument. You know, if people ask us if Freemasonry is religion, Freemasonry fills every role of a religion in a man's life in modern society. And this is a bigger question. But if we would just get over ourselves and identify ourselves as a religion, all of these questions in lots of places, especially in the progressive West, these questions would be out the window. The problem is where we're gaining a foothold in countries where they don't want secret religions to be operating, we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, you know, it would solve problems for us in North America and England and Europe, would solve a lot of big problems if we would just fess up and be like, look, this is a deist organization, we're a religion, please don't persecute us like those other religions. But then what do we do in other countries where membership is still secretive, very marginal, you know? So
you have a representative here in Georgia and Lithuania. It's so wonderful to listen to your experiences. But again, in Lithuania, it started. I wouldn't go too far. 2002. In Georgia, 2015, and whatever I'm doing now is so unusual around here. Doing streaming these lectures online. It is extremely kind of going somewhere in the clouds.
Still very secretive.
It is. I mean, there is nothing we would have. Okay, I'm kind of being a brave guy here, sort of, but that's because of my personal decision. But in reality is quite harsh, and the society wouldn't take you that easy as soon as you become an object of interest, of course. And definitely what I was thinking about this charity part, which in the case of Lithuania or in the case of Georgia, it is the brothers, the size of brotherhoods are very tiny in comparison to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in UK, in the United States, in Canada. But what would you think in our cases? To one extent, you need to give the sign of existence so the people understand that there is something that they can join, experience this personal, very individual journey that we are all engaged in. But on the other hand, you don't want to be kind of not exposed, but not too public. We cannot still do too much charity because of the sizes and the heavy burden of the charity. You cannot just go doing that. But what would you recommend in the case of Lithuania or in the case of Georgia? We are tiny countries in both cases, nationwide and the brotherhoods wide. What would be your strategy to develop these institutions here in these two countries? I mean, 300 something Lithuania, 100 something Georgia. This is the sizes we're talking about. Should we expose? Should we go more
Yeah.
public or not? Just stay there and wait like 100 years until
Well,
someone learns about.
Yeah, essentially, David, this is the realism. You're too small to be a danger or to be noticed by anyone. Things may well change 10, 20 years' time. And so perhaps this is the point in time where you're right, you start planning for when the organization is bigger. First thing I would do from a financial point of view, so that you can actually make a statement when the time comes. I'm not saying that you'll be able to buy Norman's fire engine, not unless he gives it away, but you know, you open a bank account into which you pay a small amount of money on a regular basis, and you can't touch it, and that's for future charitable use. Then at least you've embedded the idea of gathering money for charitable purposes. It might not be of any great use at the moment, but once you start that ball rolling with the miracle of compound interest, eventually, eventually you might have a goodly sum to spend on a charity. But unless you start saving now, you're not going to have any savings in 10 years' time, sort of thing. So you've got to take the first step, and that's just simply a way of preparing, planning for the future.
I think it's important to note, if I may, it's important to note that we were talking about agape earlier, and agape in modern Freemasonry is often expressed as charity. But it's an antiquarian idea of charity. It isn't the giving of alms, which is a different thing, or a direct relief, which is a different thing. The idea of charity, Masonic charity, is really the idea of forbearance, or to put it more simply in modern terms, tolerance. And so we see that expressed in a religious sense, where most lodges in most jurisdictions will accept any deist individual. So if you can claim that you believe in a supreme being, whatever supreme being that is, whether it's your higher self or it's Yahweh or it's whatever, that is the idea of forbearance or tolerance, is that you allow others without dogma to attach to your organization. They accept these few principles, and then we decide, okay, we're not going to talk about hardcore politics or religion in here, so that we can be men with other things in common and avoid all the modern tribalism and have a tolerant environment. In some ways, the raising of large sums of money for almsgiving is a result of Freemasonry's success, but I don't think it's a cornerstone of Masonic attitude. I think it's important to note that the tolerance and bringing that tolerance to a visible manifestation, that's the real reason Freemasonry exists, and the real external message of much of the degrees is that your experience of life is your experience, and everything else that guy experiences is for his business, but here's a way you can meet and discuss these mysteries of existence with this little bit of language and common experience. That's what an initiation, passing, and raising is for. Whoa, I took that in a totally different direction.
Indeed. Let me give you a quick example of what I see, or what I've seen as innovative charity by Freemasons. You remember the tsunami that hit the Malaysian islands, Indonesian islands. Because of the nature of the political system in these countries, donating money directly to government meant that you were lucky if 20% actually reached the people that needed the money. So what some of the Grand Lodges in Australia did was they chartered a ship, and they loaded it with building materials, and put out an appeal for bricklayers, plumbers, glaziers, all the kind of people that could actually build things And off they went, and they rebuilt fishing villages that had been destroyed in the tsunami. And that way, nobody got their hands on any cash at all. The charity initiative was to actually do the work that the money would have been intended to do. And so, you know, for taking your vacation and donating that time and your expertise as an electrician or a doctor or whatever, and going there had a much, much bigger impact at a local level than just money would have had. Now, of course, that's a part of the world where that would work. I'm not suggesting that you actually do that in London. I don't think you could set up your own fire brigade in London, sort of thing. But you see the point. Freemasons are able to look at a situation and decide what charity means in that situation. Anyone can stick money in a box on being shaken in front of your nose. That took, in my opinion, that took Masonic charity in a completely different direction. And I don't know whether it's ever been followed up, but I would hope that it was. But it's one hell of a commitment to expect people to separate over a few hundreds of miles away from family and friends. But that impressed the hell out of me, I have to say.
Yeah, that feeds into what Brother Honorforce was saying the other day about Masonry being the first non-governmental organization, the first international NGO. And you can see in this example of getting these brethren, these South African brethren home is another good example. You pool your influence and you call in some favors and you can pull some strings and make things happen, which people who are on the outside would accuse us of influence peddling. But once you're inside and you realize the obligations we've taken, the words we've said, if you take it seriously, if somebody were to call you and say, I need a favor and it might cost you something, you know, I think that's fascinating. And to have esteemed Brother Onofor say that the other day, just kind of, I'd never thought of it that way. It kind of blew my mind, actually. And hearing you, Brother Cooper, talking about that just now in Indonesia, that's just another good example of people doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. Sorry, Aubrey, I keep cutting you off.
No problem. Can I make a comment regarding Masonic charity in Chile? In, I think it was 1985. We had a very large earthquake out here, and the Grand Lodge of Chile put out an appeal for funds from people all over the place, and I contacted the Grand Lodge of Scotland on the subject, and the Grand Lodge of Scotland made a donation of, I think it was £5,000 to the Grand Lodge of Chile's fund for them to do their work, which they considered was necessary for the relief and restoration, in many cases, of temples and the likes. And the Grand Lodge of Scotland made a direct donation to the Grand Lodge of Chile for that subject, which was always very much appreciated.
Yeah, I don't know if £5,000 is a lot of money, to be honest.
It's not a lot of money, but £5,000 is quite a lot in Chile.
Yeah,
you could employ a lot of men for a lot of time for £5,000 in Chile in those days.
The other problem that we have here in the UK, certainly in comparison with England, and we're now talking entirely personal opinion, but the Grand Lodge of Scotland will never ever be able to compete financially with the Grand Lodge of England. It's just simply not possible. The population of Scotland is so small, and the membership is, the demographic of the membership is essentially working class, 95% working class. There is no big middle class in Scotland, and there's very little in terms of upper class. And I use these terms crudely and generally. And so that's another problem for us that the Grand Lodge of England create without realizing, is that when they make these massive public donations, there is simply no way the Grand Lodge of Scotland can respond in any way, in any kind of equal way. I mean, even if the Grand Lodge of England, and I think it's a staggering sum, millions of pounds a year, you would normally expect Scotland to be able to deliver 10% of any sort of equivalence. It's just not going to happen. So the Scots are in a bind, you know, when we see the generosity of the English Freemasons that we can't possibly match, and so that gives us a big problem. But that's the way it is.
Well, I don't think we're competing
No.
for the who's the biggest and best in terms of giving.
No.
Of course, the level that we're showing here is solely the London province. It's the Metropolitan Grand Lodge and you're a member of Lodge in London, so you're probably behind that as well. But as you'll know, each year, every lodge under United Grand Lodge of England, almost 7,000 lodges, England, Wales districts abroad, are making a donation as well as Grand Lodge dues, also to the Grand Lodge charity. And this is where some quite big money is being amassed. That, of course, is not within the purvey of London or the Metropolitan Lodge. It's the United Grand Lodge of England, and I think they do some pretty good stuff. Some of the things they do, which are very silent, and I think I've mentioned before when I've had the floor, are making grants available for medical research, very discreet medical research, and those who are involved in the research actually come into the quarterly communications and address the Grand Lodge with what they're achieving to date. Well, there's not much sponsorship involved there at all, but it is producing, good things. We can be proud of that. But Masonry has got to develop into the century, and the use of social media is being used at an ever-increasing scale to increase visibility and also membership efforts. And I do know a little bit about that side of things for the things that I do in London. Robert, Bob, can I inquire which London Lodge you're a member of?
I'm just Coronati.
Oh, you are Quater Coronati.
Yeah, past master there. Can't remember which year, but yeah, been a member now for 20 years. Let me pose you a question, and I'm going to leave you with this question. And this is a UK question, really. Given all the nonsense we get from the likes of trade unions and some political parties and indeed religious leaders, what do you think the reaction would be if all of a sudden the Grand Lodge of England, specifically the Grand Lodge of England, said, from next Monday, we are giving nothing to any charity anywhere for a full 12 months? What do you think that kind of statement would, what kind of reaction would that get?
Well,
I can tell you,
yes,
there would be shock, because everybody takes the Grand Lodge of England's charitable donations for granted. And that would be one way of reminding people that this is charity. Sorry, end of short rant.
Very reasonable comment too. Very sensible and reasonable comment.
It would be shocking. And it's the same here in North America. There is hundreds of millions of dollars being donated by every Masonic level, down with the Blue Lodges supporting a local women's shelter like we do here, all the way up to what the Shrine hospitals do at their 6 hospitals across the States, and some of the I think that number is in the hundreds of millions, and of course they're raising that with active fundraising, but it still counts as relief from the Masonic fraternity. But attempting to tote that up and present the public with a bill would only be seen as skeptical, and so unfortunately we can't do it. All we do is that no good deed goes unpunished, as Mark Twain might have said.
Yeah. I just think it would be interesting. I mean, if you picked one of the major charities and you said, look, and I'm not saying that you would ever actually do this, but if you said to them, look, we give you £1 million every year and you do nothing to defend us in public. If you don't start defending us in the media, you're not getting £1 million. Now, they wouldn't like it, but they would sit up and take notice. I'm not saying you would pick on a charity, but that's if you simply said no charity is getting any money from us for 12 months. That would get you more headlines than you've had in the last 20 years. And sadly, that is a reflection of the society in which we live. Oh yeah, give to charity. We'll take it. Thank you very much. Don't ask us to do anything for it. Anyway, guys, I must go to the little boy's room. And as I say, end of rant.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to.
Thank you, Brother Cooper, for being so generous with your time.
Yes, definitely. After lecture parties are very interesting always.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So,
David, can I ask you a question?
Sure, please.
How did Lithuania and Georgia, two extremes of what used to be the Soviet Union, join together?
State-wise or brother?
They joined together. I mean, joined together for this
lectures.
This group.
I will.
One extreme of the other.
Can I finish the recording to keep under the rule?
Yes, of course. Yes.
So just 1 second, then I'll say goodbye to everyone. So thank you, and let me stop.